The adopted one pays, my sister said, sliding a $4,560 restaurant bill across the table toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I looked down at the receipt. Lobster. 3 bottles of Dom Perignon. Wagyu steaks. A dinner I hadn't even enjoyed because I'd spent the whole night feeling like an outsider at my own sister's birthday celebration. My fingers touched the edge of the pay. For a split second, I considered. I always paid. I always took care of Vanessa. That's what good sisters do, right? But something in her voice, that cold, entitled, made my stomach turn. And when I looked up, I caught my husband Mark's eyes. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at her. And in that glance, in that one fraction of a second, I saw something I'd been too blind to see before. I pushed the bill back across the table. Slowly, deliberate. Absolutely not, I said. The words came out colder than I intended, but I didn't take them back. Vanessa's face froze. Mark shifted in his seat. The entire table went silent. I didn't know it yet. But that moment, that refusal, was the beginning of It was the night I stopped being the little sister, the loyal wife, the woman everyone could take from. The night I started to see the truth. And the truth was so much worse than I could have ever imagined. My name is Chloe. I'm an architect. I live in a beautiful suburb outside Boston. And up until that dinner, I thought I had the perfect life. A husband I adored. A sister I would have done anything for. A career I'd built with my own hands. But I was living in a house of lies. And it was about to collapse. This is the story of how I lost everything I thought I had, and how I took back everything I actually deserved. It's messy, it's painful, and it's going to take some time to tell. So, if you want to see how this all unravels, how deep the betrayal really went, and how I made them pay for every single lie, stick with me. Follow along here, because trust me, you're not going to want to miss what happens next. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over. The way Vanessa said, the adopted one pays. The way Mark looked at her instead of me. The silence that followed my refusal. Mark was beside me, breathing evenly, like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just watched my own sister humiliate me and done absolutely nothing to defend me. I wanted to shake him awake. I wanted to scream. But something told me to stay quiet. To wait. To watch. The next morning, Mark left early for work. He kissed my forehead like he always did, mumbled something about a client meeting, and was gone before I'd even finished my coffee. I sat at the kitchen island, still in my pajamas, feeling this stringiness in my chest. I kept hearing Vanessa's voice. The adopted one pays. I was adopted. Our parents never hid that from me. They loved me fiercely, treated me exactly like they treated Vanessa. When they died 3 years ago in a car accident, they left everything to both of us. But I was the one who handled the estate. I was the one who made sure Vanessa got her half. I was the one who took care of everything. And this was how she spoke to me? I grabbed my phone and opened our family group chat. There were messages from last night after we'd all left the restaurant. Vanessa had posted a photo of herself blowing out candles on some ridiculous tiered cake with a caption about how grateful she was for family. Mark had liked it. I scrolled back further looking for, I don't know what, some sign, some clue, and that's when I saw it. A message from 2 weeks ago. Vanessa had asked Mark if he could help her move some furniture. He'd said, of course, that he'd come by on Tuesday after I left for my site visit. I stared at that message. Why hadn't we told each other everything? Or at least, I thought we did. I checked my calendar. That Tuesday, I had been at a construction site in Cambridge all day. Mark had told me he was working from home, but according to this message, he'd gone to Vanessa's apartment. It was such a small thing, helping my sister move furniture. But the secrecy, that was what made my skin crawl. I put the phone down and maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was still upset about the dinner and looking for problems where there weren't. I decided to do something I'd never done, something that made me feel sick, even as I went upstairs to Mark's home office. He never locked it. His laptop was sitting on the desk, closed. I opened it, and the screen lit up. He hadn't even logged out. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt like a criminal, like I was crossing some line I could never uncross. But I opened his email anyway. I scrolled through his inbox, work emails, spam, receipts from Amazon, nothing unusual. I was about to close the laptop, feeling guilty and foolish, when I saw a folder in his sidebar labeled Personal VV Vanessa. My hand hovered over the trackpad. This was it. This was the moment I could either walk away and pretend I never saw it, or I could click and know that it clicked. The folder opened and my stomach dropped. There were dozens of emails, all between Mark and Vanessa. I opened the most recent one, dated 3 days ago. The subject line said something about the weekend. I started reading, and I felt the floor disappear. Vanessa had written that she couldn't wait, that she'd already booked the place. She asked if I still thought Mark was going to that conference in New York. Mark had replied that I'd bought the story completely, that he'd leave Friday morning and meet her by noon. Vanessa had written back that she hated lying to me, but that I wouldn't understand anyway. Mark had agreed, saying I didn't need to know yet, that they should just enjoy themselves. I read it 3 times, then I read it again. My husband and my sister planning a weekend away, while I thought he was at a work conference. I scrolled back further. There were more emails, months of them, little inside jokes, complaints about me, about how controlling I was, how I never let things go, how I was always working. And then I found it, an email from 6 months ago. The subject line said something about an account. Mark had written that he'd set it up under Vanessa's name like she'd asked. He'd been moving $3,000 a month from our joint account. He'd written that I never checked it, that I trusted. Vanessa had replied calling him a genius. She'd written that it was going to be perfect, that I'd never see it coming. I couldn't. They were stealing from me, my husband, my sister. They were taking my money I'd earned, money I'd inherited from my parents, and hiding it in some secret. I sat there at Mark's desk, staring at the screen. I felt something inside me crack wide open. It wasn't just about a weekend getaway. This wasn't just a stupid affair. This was planned, calculated, cruel. And I realized, with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins, that I had been played for a fool. I closed the laptop carefully, like it might explode if I moved too fast. Hands were shaking so badly I had to sit on them. $3,000 a month. For 6 months, that was $18,000. Money that should have been in our joint account. Money I'd earned. Money that was supposed to be building our future. The future I thought we were planning together. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw his laptop out the window. I wanted to call him right then and confront him. Hear him stumble through some pathetic explanation. But I didn't, because somewhere in the shock and the rage and the heartbreak, a tiny voice in my head whispered, if you confront them now, they'll just lie. They'll cover their tracks. You need real, solid, undeniable proof. So I took out my phone and started taking pictures. Every email, every message, every single word they'd written about me, about their plans, about the money. My hands steadied as I worked. It felt good to have a purpose, something concrete to do instead of just falling apart. When I was done, I cleared the browser history and closed the laptop exactly how I'd found it. Then I went downstairs, made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table trying to figure out what the hell to do next. I needed help, needed someone I could trust. I called Simone. Simone Chen had been my best friend since college. She was sharp, brilliant, and completely no-nonsense, which is probably why she'd become one of the best family law attorneys in Boston. If anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it was her. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the concern in her voice immediately when I said I needed to see her. She told me to come to her office right away. An hour later, I was sitting across from her, watching her face grow darker and darker as she scrolled through the photos on my phone. When she finally looked up at me, her expression was pure fury. She told me this was fraud, financial abuse, that Mark had been systematically stealing from me and Vanessa had been complicit. She asked if I wanted to press charges. I hadn't even thought that far ahead. I just wanted to understand what was happening. Simone leaned forward and told me we needed to dig deeper. We needed to find that account. We needed to see exactly how much money they'd taken and what they'd been doing with it. She made some calls right there in front of me. Within an hour, she'd connected with a forensic accountant she trusted. His name was David Park, and he specialized in cases like mine, tracking hidden assets, uncovering financial deception. David told me he'd need access to my bank records, credit card statements, anything I had. I gave him everything. The waiting was torture. For 3 days, I went through the motions of normal life. I smiled at Mark over breakfast. I texted Vanessa back when she sent me some stupid meme. I went to work and pretended to care about floor plans and building permits, but inside I was screaming. Finally, David called. He asked if I could come to Simone's office. He said he'd found something and I needed to see it in person. When I walked into that conference room and saw the look on both their faces, I knew it was bad. David opened his laptop and turned it toward me. He'd found the account. It was in Vanessa's name, but Mark had set it up using our joint account information as the funding source. He walked me through the trail. $3,000 transferred every month like clockwork since last March. But that wasn't the worst part. David pulled up another document, a property deed, for a luxury apartment in the Seaport District, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Boston. The apartment had been purchased 4 months ago for $680,000, and it was in both their names, Mark and Vanessa. I stared at that document, at their names side by side, like they were a couple, like they were building a life together, with my money. Simone reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She told me there was more. David pulled up bank statements for the secret account. They hadn't just been saving my money, they'd been spending it. Expensive dinners, weekend trips to New York and Miami, designer clothes, a brand new Mercedes that was registered to Vanessa. I'd been working 60-hour weeks, skipping vacations, being responsible and careful with money because Mark and I were supposed to be saving for a house renovation, maybe starting a family. And the whole time, he'd been building a different life. With her. The room started spinning. I couldn't breathe. Simone was talking, saying something about next steps and legal options, but I couldn't hear her over the ringing in my ears. How long had this been going on? How long had they been laughing at me behind my back? The stupid, trusting little sister who paid for everything and never asked questions. I thought about every time I'd been generous with Vanessa. Every time I'd covered her rent when she was between jobs. Every time I'd loaned her money she never paid back. Every birthday, every holiday, every crisis where I'd shown up with my checkbook open. And this was how she repaid me. This was what my marriage had been. I looked up at Simone, and I heard myself say something I didn't even know I was thinking. I told her I wasn't just going to divorce him. I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to make them pay for every single lie, every stolen dollar, every moment they'd made me feel crazy for sensing something was wrong. Simone smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who was ready for war. She told me good, because she had a plan. The hardest thing I've ever done in my life was walking back into my house that night and pretending everything was normal. Mark was in the kitchen making pasta. He smiled when he saw me, asked how my day was, told me about some boring meeting he'd had with a client. He looked so relaxed, so comfortable, stirring the sauce and humming along to whatever playlist he had going. Like he wasn't a liar, like he wasn't a thief, like he hadn't spent the last 6 months stealing from me to build a secret life with my sister. I stood there in the doorway. For a second, I thought I'd be sick. But I swallowed it down, forced a smile, and told him my day was fine. Simone had been very clear about what I needed to do. Don't tip them off. Don't let them know you know anything. The element of surprise was the only advantage I had, and if I blew it now, they'd have time to hide evidence, move money, come up with excuses. So I had to pretend. I had to sit across from my husband at dinner and make small talk. I had to laugh at his jokes. I had to sleep next to him at night and act like I didn't want to scream every time he touched me. It was torture. But I did it because I wanted the truth, all of it, and I wanted them to hand it to me themselves. The opportunity came 3 days later. Vanessa called and asked if I wanted to come over for lunch. She said she felt bad about the birthday dinner, that maybe she'd been too harsh, and she wanted to make it up to me. Every word out of her mouth was a lie, but I said yes anyway. I showed up at her apartment, the same apartment I'd helped her move into 2 years ago. The same apartment where I'd spent countless evenings listening to her complain about her life, and I acted like nothing had changed. She'd made sandwiches. We sat on her couch, and she asked me about work, about Mark, about whether we were still thinking about starting a family. I wanted to throw my sandwich in her face. Instead, I played along. I told her Mark and I were doing great, that work was busy but good, that we were thinking maybe next year we'd start trying for a baby. She smiled and told me that I'd be such a good mom. I watched her face as she said it, searching for any crack in the mask, any sign of guilt or discomfort. But she was good. She was so good at this. We talked for over an hour, and I was starting to think this whole lunch was pointless, that I wasn't going to learn anything new. And then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and I saw her face change just for a second. A flash of panic, quickly covered. She told me it was just a work thing, that she needed to take it in the other room. She got up and walked into her bedroom, closing the door behind her, but she didn't close it all the way. and I could hear her voice, low, drifting through the gap. She was talking to Mark. I sat thickly still, straining to hear every. She was telling him I was there, at her apartment, right now. She said I seemed fine, maybe even a little too fine, and she was wondering if I suspected anything. Mark must have said something reassuring because she laughed, this cold, dismissive laugh, and told him he was right, that I was too trusting to figure it out. Then she said something that made my blood freeze. She told him they needed to move up the timeline, that they'd been planning to wait until after the holidays to make their move, but maybe they should do it sooner. She said once they transferred the rest of the money and I signed those papers he'd drawn up, it would all be over and they could finally stop sneaking around. Papers. She said something about me being so busy with that new project that I'd probably sign anything he put in front of me without even reading it. Mark must have agreed because she laughed again and said she'd see him tonight at the apartment. Their apartment, the one I'd paid for. She hung up, and I heard her footsteps coming back toward the living room. I grabbed my phone and pretended to be scrolling through Instagram, like I hadn't just heard her entire conversation. She sat back down, all smiles, and asked if I wanted more tea. I told her no, that I actually needed to get going. I had a site inspection that afternoon. She walked me to the door, gave me a hug, told me we should do this more often. I hugged her back and told her absolutely. The second I got in my car, I called Simone. I told her everything. The phone call, the timeline they were moving up, the papers Mark was planning to have me sign. Simone was quiet for a moment. Then she told me we needed to figure out what those papers were, and fast. If Mark was planning to have me sign something, it was probably a financial document, maybe a loan or a transfer of assets, or even a prenup modification. She told me to search his office again, carefully, and to photograph anything that looked remotely suspicious. That night, Mark told me he had to work late. Some client emergency. He kissed me goodbye and said he'd be home around midnight. I knew exactly where he was going. The second his car pulled out of the driveway, I went back to his office. This time, I knew what I was looking for. I went through every drawer, every file folder, every stack of papers on his desk, and then I found them. Tucked into a folder labeled Estate Planning, there were documents with my name on them. Transfer of property rights, a document that would give Mark sole ownership of the house we'd bought together, another one that would make him the primary beneficiary of my investment accounts. All of them had signature lines waiting for. I stared at those papers, and I finally understood the full scope of their plan. They weren't just stealing from me, they were setting me up to give them everything. And then, I assumed, they'd leave me with nothing. I took pictures of every single page. Then I carefully put everything back exactly where I'd found it. When Mark came home that night, smelling like Vanessa's perfume, I was already in bed with the lights off. He slipped in beside me, whispered that he loved me, and fell asleep within minutes. I lay there in the dark, listening to him, and I felt something shift inside. The heartbreak was still there. The betrayal still burned. But now there was something else. Something cold and sharp. They'd made a mistake. They'd underestimated. They'd assumed I'd stay blind and trusting forever. And that mistake was going to cost them everything. I spent the next week building my case like I was drafting blueprints for a building. Carefully, methodically, making sure every single detail. Simone connected me with more people. A private investigator named Rachel Torres who specialized in infidelity cases. A financial crimes detective she knew from a previous case. Every day, the web of evidence grew stronger, tighter, more undeniable. But there was still something I didn't understand. Why? Why would Mark do this? We had a good life, a beautiful home, successful careers. I'd never denied him anything. We had plans together, dreams we were supposed to be building toward. And Vanessa, my own sister, the person I'd loved and protected and provided for my entire life. What had I ever done to help? I needed to understand, not because it would change anything, not because it would make what they did okay, because I needed to know what kind of people they... Rachel, the private investigator, told me she'd been following them for 3 days. She'd gotten photos, timestamps, patterns, but she said there was something I should see in person. She'd tracked them to a bar in downtown Boston, one of those trendy places with exposed brick and craft cocktails. She said they met there every Tuesday night when I thought Mark was at his poker game. I told her I wanted to go, to see them together with my own eyes. She warned me it would hurt, that sometimes knowing and seeing are two very different things. I went anyway. Rachel and I sat in her car across the street, and she handed me a pair of small binoculars. I felt ridiculous, like I was in some bad detective movie. But then I saw them through the window, sitting at a corner table, And suddenly it was all too real. They looked happy. That's what killed me the most. Vanessa was laughing at something Mark had said, her hand on his arm, leaning in close. Mark had this look on his face I hadn't seen in months. Relaxed, content, like he didn't have a care in the world. They looked like a couple in love. I watched them for almost an hour. The way they touched, the way they looked at each other, the way Vanessa would glance around occasionally, like she was checking to make sure no one she knew was watching. At one point, Mark pulled out his phone and showed her something. They both laughed. Then Vanessa said something, and Mark's expression shifted. He looked almost proud, like she'd just praised him for something. That's when I realized I needed to hear what they were saying. Rachel had already thought of that. She told me she'd planted a small audio device near their usual table the day before. She pulled out her phone and turned on the recording app. That's when I heard it, everything I'd been too afraid to ask. Vanessa's voice came through first. She was talking about me, about how clueless I was, how I'd always been the golden child despite being adopted, how our parents had left me in charge of everything like she said it with such bitterness, such venom, that I barely recognized her voice. Mark had responded that it wasn't going to matter much longer, that once I signed those papers, they'd have access to everything. The house, my retirement accounts, the inheritance money I'd invested. Vanessa had laughed and said something that made my stomach. She said I deserved it, that I'd spent my whole life acting like I was better than her, like I was the responsible one, the successful one, the one everyone could count on. She said she was tired of living in my shadow, tired of being the screw-up sister who always needed help. She said taking everything from me was the only way to find. Mark had told her I was too predictable, too boring, too focused on work, that being married to me felt like being trapped, that Vanessa understood him in ways I never could. Then Vanessa had said something that made everything click into place. She told Mark that once they had my money, once they'd bled me dry, they should just leave. Start over somewhere new. Maybe California. Somewhere I'd never find them. She said it would be like I never existed. I sat in that car, listening to my sister and my husband casually discuss erasing me from their lives. And I finally understood. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even really about money. This was about Vanessa's jealousy, her resentment. Every kind thing I'd ever done for her, she'd twisted into an insult. Every success I'd had was something she needed to destroy. And Mark, he was just weak, selfish, too cowardly to divorce me honestly, so he'd chosen to rob me instead. They weren't master criminals. They weren't evil geniuses. They were just broken, petty people who'd found each other. Rachel turned off the recording and asked if I was okay. I told her I was better than okay because now I knew exactly what I was doing, and more importantly, I knew they had no idea what was coming for them. The recording Rachel had gotten was legal. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for recording conversations in public places. Simone confirmed we could use it. But I needed more. I needed to know every detail of their plan so I could dismantle it completely. I went home that night and did something I'd been putting off. I called the bank that handled my inheritance accounts. I told them I was concerned about potential fraud, and I wanted to add extra security measures. They walked me through setting up alerts for any attempted transfers or changes to beneficiaries. Within 2 hours, I got an alert. Someone had tried to access my accounts. The attempt had been blocked because of the new security protocols, but the system had logged the login location and device information. It was Mark's laptop, from our home office. He'd tried to access my inheritance accounts while I was at work. I forwarded the alert to Simone immediately. She told me this was perfect. This was proof of attempted financial fraud happening in real time. She said we had enough now, more than enough. But she asked me if I wanted to wait to catch them in the act with the papers, or if I wanted to move forward now. I thought about it, about the apartment they'd bought with my money, about the life they'd been building behind my back, about Vanessa's voice on that recording, so casual about erasing. I told Simone I wanted to wait just a little longer because I wanted them to think they'd won. I wanted them to feel safe, comfortable, confident, and then I wanted to watch their whole world fall apart. The next piece fell into place from somewhere I never expected. I was at work, trying to focus on a residential project that was due for city approval, when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was hesitant, nervous. A woman. She introduced herself as Lauren Hayes and said she needed to talk to me about Mark. Heart stopped. She told me she was Mark's coworker. that they'd been working on the same accounts team for about 2 years. She said she had information I needed to hear, but she wanted to meet in person. I told her yes immediately. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop in Cambridge, far enough from both our offices that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. Lauren was younger than me, maybe late 20s, with dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't been sleeping well. She ordered a coffee she didn't drink and then told me everything. She said Mark had been acting strange at work for months, taking long lunches, making personal calls in the conference room, being secretive about his schedule. At first, she hadn't thought much of it. People have lives outside work. But then, about 3 weeks ago, she'd been working late and had accidentally seen something on Mark's computer screen when she walked past his desk. It was a financial document, a transfer authorization form. And my name was on it. She said it had bothered her, but she didn't know what to do. It wasn't really her business. Maybe it was something normal between a husband and wife. Then she'd seen him with Vanessa. She'd been leaving the office one evening and had seen Mark getting into a car with a woman who definitely wasn't me. She'd recognized Vanessa from the photos on Mark's desk, the family photos he kept there to maintain his image as a devoted husband. Lauren had watched them drive away together, laughing, his hand on her knee. She said that's when she knew something was really wrong, and she started paying closer attention. She'd noticed Mark accessing financial software that wasn't part of his normal job duties. She'd overheard him on the phone talking about property transfers and asset management in ways that sounded personal, not professional. And then, 2 days ago, she'd seen him printing documents in the office after hours. Documents with my name on them. She said her own sister had been financially abused by an ex-husband, drained of her savings, left with nothing, and she couldn't stand by and watch it happen to someone else, so she'd made copies. Lauren pulled a manila folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Inside were printouts of everything she'd seen, bank transfer authorizations with forged signatures that looked like mine, property deeds Mark had been preparing, email exchanges between Mark and someone at a private investment firm about moving assets into untraceable offshore accounts. Offshore accounts. They weren't just planning to take my money. They were planning to hide it where I could never recover it. I stared at those documents, feeling this strange mix of gratitude and rage. Gratitude that this woman I'd never met had risked her job to help me. Rage that the betrayal went even deeper than I'd thought. Lauren told me she'd already been in touch with her company's ethics department, that she'd reported Mark's misuse of company resources and his potential involvement in fraud. She said they were conducting an internal investigation. She also told me she'd be willing to testify if it came to that, to share everything she knew. I asked her why she was doing this for a stranger. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and told me she'd watched her sister almost lose everything. Her savings, her home, her will to fight. And by the time anyone had noticed, it was almost too late. She said if she could stop it from happening to me, she had to try. I reached across the table and took her hand. I told her thank you didn't even begin to cover it. She squeezed my hand and told me to destroy them, to make sure they never did this to anyone else. I promised her I would. That night, I met with Simone and David, the forensic accountant. I showed them everything Lauren had given me. The offshore account information was the key we'd been missing. David said he could trace the money flow, prove exactly where my funds were being moved and when. Simone told me we now had enough evidence to pursue criminal charges. Fraud, embezzlement, forgery. The list went on. But she also said we needed to be strategic. We could go to the police now, but Mark and Vanessa would immediately lawyer up. And the legal process could take years. They might even find ways to hide more of the money before it could be recovered. Or we could confront them directly, with lawyers present. Offer them a choice. Confess everything. Return every penny they'd stolen, sign away any rights to my assets, and walk away quietly. Or face criminal prosecution. I asked her what she thought I should do. She leaned back in her chair and told me it was my choice. But she said if it were her, she'd want to see their faces when they realized they'd lost. She'd want them to know that they'd underestimated the wrong person. Thought about Vanessa's voice on that recording. About how she'd said I deserved to lose everything. About how Mark had tried to access my inheritance accounts from our own home. Thought about every lie, fake smile, every moment they'd made me feel like I was crazy for sensing something was wrong. And I made my decision. I told Simone to set up a meeting, get both of them in a room with lawyers. I wanted to confront them face to face. I wanted to watch them realize they'd been caught. Simone smiled, that fierce, protective smile I'd come to rely on, and told me she'd make it happen. She made some calls right there. By the end of the night, we had a meeting scheduled for Friday afternoon at our law office. 3 days away. Mark and Vanessa had no idea what was coming. Simone had framed it as a routine meeting about estate planning, something Mark had been asking me to do for months. She'd even used Mark's own lies against him, telling him I'd finally agreed to sign those papers he'd been preparing. They thought they were walking into their victory. Instead, they were walking into checkmate. I went home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks: power. Not the kind that comes from money or success or status, the kind that comes from knowing and having the evidence the kind that comes from being underestimated and then proving everyone wrong. Mark was already home when I got there. He asked me about my day, told me he'd picked up Thai food for dinner. He seemed relaxed, happy even. I looked at him sitting there at our kitchen counter, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire world was about to implode, not even just a clear certain that justice was 3 days away. 3 days being were the longest. Keep smiling, keep acting like I had no idea what was about to happen. Mark was in a good mood, almost giddy. He kept talking about the meeting on Friday, about how it was such a smart move to finally get our estate planning in order. He said it would give us both peace of mind. I watched him lie to my face and wondered how I'd ever thought I knew this man. Vanessa texted me Thursday night. She said she'd heard from Mark that we were doing some financial planning, and she thought it was really mature of us. She added that she hoped I was finally learning to trust Mark's judgment about money. The audacity of it actually made me laugh. A cold, bitter laugh that Mark heard from the other room. He asked what was funny, and I told him just something on Twitter. He didn't press it. That Thursday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept going over everything in my mind, every piece of evidence, every document, every recording. Simone had assured me we had an airtight case, that there was no way they could talk their way out of this. But there was still a part of me that was terrified they'd find some loophole, some way to twist the truth, some way to make me look like the crazy one. I got up around 2 a.m. and went downstairs. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard. The yard where Mark and I had talked about maybe building a deck, where we'd imagined our future kids playing. All of it had been a lie. I heard footsteps behind me. Mark had woken up and come looking for me. He asked if I was okay, said I seemed stressed lately. He put his hand on my shoulder, and it took everything in me not to flinch. I told him I was fine, just nervous about the meeting tomorrow, about making such big financial decisions. He squeezed my shoulder and told me not to worry, that he had everything under control, that I could trust him. The irony of those words made me want to scream. Instead, I smiled and told him I knew, that I did trust him. His face relaxed. He kissed the top of my head and told me to come back to bed. I followed him upstairs, and as I lay there in the dark, listening to him fall back asleep, I realized something. This moment, right now, was the last time he'd ever feel safe, the last time he'd ever believe he'd gotten away with it. Tomorrow, Friday morning came too fast and not fast enough. Mark was up early, whistling in the shower. He put on one of his best suits, the navy one he wore to important client meetings. He looked at himself in the mirror and adjusted his tie, completely satisfied with what he saw. I got dressed in my favorite black blazer and pants, armor for what was coming. We drove separately to Simone's office. Mark said he had to stop by work first to grab some documents. I knew he was probably meeting Vanessa, making sure their story was straight, going over their plans one last time. Let them plan. It wouldn't matter. I got to Simone's office 30 minutes early. She was already there, looking sharp and focused in a way that made me feel safer. David was there too, with his laptop and 3 banker's boxes full of evidence. And Lauren, brave, wonderful Lauren, had taken the afternoon off work to be there as a witness. Simone walked me through what was going to happen. We'd let Mark and Vanessa arrive. We'd let them get comfortable, let them think this meeting was going exactly as they planned, and then we'd show them everything. She asked me one more time if I was ready. I was sure I wanted to do this. I told her I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. Mark arrived first at exactly 2 o'clock. He walked in with his briefcase, all confidence and charm, shaking hands with Simone like they were old friends. He barely glanced at David and Lauren, probably assuming they were just office staff. Vanessa showed up 5 minutes later. She was dressed expensively. Wearing a designer dress I suddenly realized I'd probably paid for without knowing it. She hugged me and told me how proud she was of me for taking this step. I hugged her back and felt absolutely nothing. We all sat down in Simone's conference room. It was one of those big rooms with a long table and windows overlooking the city. Mark sat next to me. Vanessa sat across from us. They both looked so relaxed, so ready to finally get what they wanted. Simone started the meeting by thanking everyone for coming. She said we were here to discuss some important financial matters regarding my estate and assets. Mark nodded eagerly. He reached into his briefcase and started to pull out the papers, those documents that would have signed away everything I owned. Simone held up her hand and told him to wait. She said there were a few things we needed to discuss first. She looked at me. I nodded. And that's when Simone opened her laptop and turned it so the screen faced Mark and Vanessa. She pressed play on a video file. It was security footage from the Seaport apartment building. Footage showing Mark and Vanessa entering together. Footage of them on the balcony, kissing. Footage of them living a life I'd paid for. The color drained from Mark's face. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Simone didn't pause. She pulled out the bank statements showing the transfers. The emails between them plotting against me. The recording from the bar where Vanessa had said I deserved to lose everything. She laid it all out, piece by piece, like she was building a case in court, which, I realized, she was. David took over next, walking through the financial fraud, the forged signatures, the attempted access to my inheritance accounts, the offshore accounts they'd been planning to use to hide my money. Lauren spoke last. She testified about what she'd witnessed at Mark's office, about the documents she'd seen him preparing, about the ethics violations and the internal investigation his company was now conducting. By the time we were done, Mark and Vanessa looked like they'd been hit by a truck. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Vanessa tried to speak. She started to say something about how this was all a misunderstanding, how they could explain everything. Simone cut her off. She told them they had two choices. They could confess to everything, return every penny they'd stolen, sign documents relinquishing any claim to my assets, and walk away quietly. Or she would take this evidence to the district attorney and press full criminal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. She gave them 5 minutes to decide. I watched Mark's face crumble, watched Vanessa's mask finally slip, revealing the desperate, bitter person under, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a deep, weary relief that it was finally over. The 5 minutes Simone gave them felt like an eternity. Mark and Vanessa sat there, frozen. I watched them look at some silent conversation passing. Mark's face had gone from shock to panic to something that looked almost like desperation. Vanessa's hands were shaking on the table. Finally, Mark turned to Simone and asked if he could speak to his attorney. Simone told him, of course, that he was welcome to call anyone he wanted. But she also reminded him that every minute he delayed was a minute closer to her walking this evidence down to the DA's office. Mark pulled out his phone with trembling hands. He stepped out into the hallway. I could see him through the glass wall, pacing, his voice rising and falling as he spoke to whoever was on the other end. Vanessa stayed seated. She was staring at the table, her jaw clenched tight. Then she looked up at me, and for a second I saw something in her eyes that might have been real. She told me she was sorry, that she never meant for it to go this far. I looked right back at her and told her yes, she did, that every step of this had been deliberate. Every lie, every theft, every moment she'd smiled to my face while planning to destroy me. She flinched like I'd slapped her. She started to say something else, but Mark came back in. His attorney had apparently told him exactly what I expected, that the evidence against them was overwhelming and his best option was to take the deal. Simone laid out the terms clearly. They would both sign detailed confessions admitting to everything. Mark would transfer full ownership of our house to me and remove himself from all my financial accounts. They would return every penny they'd taken, including selling the Seaport apartment and the Mercedes. Mark would sign the divorce papers with no contest, no alimony, no claims to any shared assets, and Vanessa would sign a document stating she had no claim to any part of our parents' estate, now or ever. In exchange, I wouldn't press criminal charges. Simone gave them the documents, told them to read carefully because once they signed, it was over. Mark tried one last time. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and told me we could work this out, that we could go to counseling, that he'd made mistakes, but he still loved me. I felt nothing. I told him he didn't love me, that he probably never had, that love doesn't steal, love doesn't lie, love doesn't plot with your wife's sister to take everything she's worked for and leave her with nothing. I told him to sign the papers. His hand shook as he picked up the pen. Vanessa signed without saying another word. She wouldn't even look at me. David verified every signature, every initial, every clause. Simone made copies of everything. It took almost an hour to get through all the paperwork. And the entire time, the only sound in that conference room was pen on paper and Mark's occasional shaky breath. When it was done, Simone collected all the documents and told them they could leave. Mark stood up slowly, like his legs might give out. He looked at me one more time, and I saw the moment he realized I wasn't going to change my mind, that there was no going back from this. He walked out without another word. Vanessa lingered for just a moment. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Then she grabbed her purse and left. I watched them walk down the hallway toward the elevators, watched the doors close, watched them disappear, and then I finally let myself. Simone put her hand on my shoulder and asked if I was okay. I told her honestly I didn't know. I felt numb, empty, like I'd just survived something that had, but I also felt. David started explaining the next steps, how long it would take to process the asset transfers, how we'd need to monitor the offshore accounts to make sure every dollar was accounted, how Mark's company would likely fire him once their internal investigation concluded. Lauren gave me a hug and told me I was the bravest person she'd ever met, that what I'd just done took more strength than most people had. I thanked her, told her I couldn't have done any of this without her. She smiled and said, "That's what women do. We protect each other." I left Simone's office around 6 that evening. The sun was starting to set, painting the Boston skyline in oranges and pinks. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing in the cool autumn air, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. All it said was that he was sorry, that he never wanted to hurt me. I deleted it without responding. Then another text came, this one from Vanessa. It was longer. She rambled about how things had gotten out of control, how she'd been jealous of me her whole life, how she knew what they'd done was wrong, but she felt like she'd never be able to measure up to me. I read it twice. Then I blocked her number, because the truth was, I didn't care anymore why they did it. I didn't need their apologies or their explanations. I didn't need closure. I'd already given myself closure by refusing to be their victim. I drove home in the dark, and when I pulled into the driveway of the house that was now legally mine alone, I sat in the car. This house had been full of lies, full of a life I thought I was building with someone who'd been planning to take it all away. But it was mine now, really mine, and tomorrow I could start deciding what I wanted to do with my life, with everything. I walked inside and stood in the kitchen where this had all started, where Vanessa had slid that bill across the table and called me the adopted one, where I'd first felt that crack in the foundation of my life. I poured myself a glass of wine, raised it to the empty house, and I thought about the woman I'd been 6 weeks ago, the woman who would have paid that bill without question, the woman who trusted everyone and suspected nothing. She was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who wouldn't be taken advantage of ever again, someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't let anyone diminish it. I drank that wine slowly, standing at the window, watching the lights of Boston flicker in the distance. And for the first time in weeks, I slept. 3 months have passed since that meeting in Simone's office. 3 months since I watched Mark and Vanessa sign away everything they'd tried to steal from me. 3 months since I took my life back. The divorce was finalized last week. I got the official papers in the mail, and I sat there staring at them for a long time. Not because I was sad, not because I had any regrets, but because it felt surreal that a decade of my life with Mark could be reduced to a stack of legal documents with official stamps. But that's what happens when you build a marriage on lies. It dissolves just as easily as it was constructed. Mark lost his job, just like David predicted. The internal investigation at his company found multiple ethics violations and misuse of company resources. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he moved back to Ohio, where his parents live, that he's working some entry-level position at a small firm, barely making enough to cover his rent. I felt nothing when I heard that. Not pity, not satisfaction, just nothing. Vanessa had to sell everything. The designer clothes, the jewelry, all the luxuries she'd bought with my money. The Seaport apartment sold quickly. The Boston real estate market is always hungry, and every penny went back into my accounts. She moved into a small studio in Allston, the kind of place she would have been horrified by a year ago. She tried to reach out a few weeks after the confrontation. She sent me a letter, an actual handwritten letter, since I'd blocked her on everything else. It was 6 pages long, full of apologies and explanations and justifications. She wrote about how hard it was growing up as the biological daughter, watching our parents dote on me, how she'd always felt like she had to compete with, how the resentment had built up over years until it poisoned everything. I read the whole thing once, then I threw it away. Because here's what I realized. Her jealousy, pain, her feelings of inadequacy, none of that was my responsibility. I didn't make her feel that way. Our parents loved us both. I'd spent years being generous with her, helping her, supporting her, and she'd chosen to turn that into a reason to hate me. That was her burden to carry, not mine. The money is all back. Every dollar accounted for. David did an incredible job tracking everything down, even the funds they'd tried to move offshore. My accounts are actually healthier now than they were before because Simone negotiated interest and penalties into the settlement. But the truth is, the money was never really, it was about respect, about dignity, about refusing to be erased by people who thought I was too trusting to fight back. I sold the house 2 months ago. I couldn't live there too many ghosts, too many memories of a life that had never been real. I bought a beautiful loft in the South End, all exposed brick and huge windows with views of the city. It's smaller than the house, but it's mine, totally. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, every decision about how I want to live. Work has been good. Better than good, actually. After everything happened, I threw myself into a new project, designing a community center for a nonprofit that works with survivors of domestic abuse. It felt meaningful in a way work hadn't felt in a long time, like I was building something that mattered. The director of the nonprofit, a woman named Patricia, told me my design was exactly what they'd been hoping for. She said it felt like I understood what survivors needed. Spaces that felt safe but not institutional, empowering but not intimidating. I told her I did understand more than I'd ever wanted to. I've been going to therapy. Every week, sitting in Dr. Morrison's office, untangling all the things that came with this. The betrayal, the anger, the grief for the life I thought I had, but also the strength I didn't know I possessed. The realization that I could trust my instincts, that I could stand up for myself, that I could survive the worst thing I'd ever been through and come out stronger. Dr. Morrison asked me recently if I forgave them. Mark and Vanessa. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I told her I didn't forgive them. Not in the traditional sense. What they did was unforgivable. But I also didn't carry hatred for them anymore. They weren't worth that kind of energy. I'd released them from my life, and in doing so, I'd freed myself. Last week, I had dinner with Simone, David, and Lauren. We met at that same coffee shop where Lauren had first told me everything. Lauren brought her sister, Michelle, the one who'd survived her. We spent the evening talking and laughing, and Michelle told me she was proud of me. That what I'd done was what she wished she'd had the courage to do years ago. I told her she did have the courage, that survival itself is courage, that rebuilding your life after someone tries to destroy it is one of the bravest things a person. She hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you." These women, Simone, Lauren, Michelle, Patricia from the nonprofit, they've become my real family, the family I chose. The family that showed up when I needed them most. The family that reminded me what loyalty and love actually look like. This morning, I woke up in my loft to sunlight streaming through the windows. I made coffee and stood on my balcony, looking out at the city coming to life. I thought about the woman I was a year ago, the woman who would have paid that $4,560 bill without question. The woman who ignored her instincts because she wanted so badly to be loved. Not that woman anymore. I'm someone who knows her, someone who trusts herself, someone who understands doesn't mean letting, and that love shouldn't cost you. I'm not going to lie and say this journey was easy. Nights I cried myself to sleep. Days I felt so angry I couldn't think straight. Moments I wanted to give up, to just let them have what they wanted because fighting felt too exhausting. But I didn't give up. And that's what I want you to know. If you're out there going through something similar, if you're reading this and feeling like you're trapped, like the people you trusted are taking advantage of you, like you don't have the strength to fight back. You do. You absolutely do. It won't be. There will be moments when you doubt yourself, when they try to make you feel crazy for questioning them, when everyone around you says you should just let it go. Don't let it go. Trust your instincts. Find people who will support you. Gather your evidence. Build your case. And then fight like hell for what's yours. Because you deserve better than lies. You deserve a life built on truth and respect, and people who value you for who you are, not what they can. I got my life back. I got my power back. I got myself back. And now I'm building something real. Something that's completely authentic. The past is who hurt me are gone. Future is mine to. So tell me, where are you hearing this from? What city are you in right now? I'd love to know that my story reached you, wherever you are. Drop a comment and let me know. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories about women who fought back, stories about finding strength you didn't know you had, subscribe and stay because I'm not going, and neither this